Great. And then this morning's meeting is going to be chaired by Vice Chair Superintendent Siskillen this morning. So I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the MPO Policy Committee and remind you again that this meeting is being live streamed. Please press *6 on your phone if you are calling in so that you can mute or unmute yourself during the conversation. As permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration dated March 3rd, 2023, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this board. To ensure a transparent and open meeting is possible, the meeting materials were posted 1 week in advance, and a recording of this meeting will be provided and linked on CMAP's website, and also all votes will be taken by roll call. With that, I'm going to call upon CMAP Executive Director Erin Alleman to please call the roll.
Great, thank you. And I will ask if the appointed member is not in attendance, that the alternate please identify yourself. I will call organization here this morning. So IDOT.
Present. Holly Beanman, Illinois Department of Transportation.
Thank you. CDOT.
Here.
CMAP Frank Beal. CMAP President Brawley. Thank you. CTA.
Mike Connolly here, representing Dorval R. Carter Jr. for CTA.
Thank you. Cook County.
Here.
Council of Mayors.
Jeff Shoki here representing the Council of Mayors.
Thank you. DuPage County.
Chris Snyder representing Chair Conroy.
Thank you. FHWA.
John Donovan representing Dave Snyder.
Thank you. FTA. Illinois State Toll Highway Authority.
Good morning, Rocco Zucchero representing Cassandra Rouse.
Thank you. Kane County.
Corinne Pirog representing Kane County.
Good morning. Kendall County. Lake County.
Good morning, Kevin Carrier representing Chair Hart.
Thank you. McHenry County.
Good morning, Scott Hennings representing Chair Bueller.
Thank you. Metra.
Good morning, Lynette Civarello representing Jim Derwinski.
Pace. I saw Melinda on earlier. We will make sure.
Yeah, I can't get my camera on. It's Melinda Metra representing Pace.
No worries, we can hear you just fine. Thank you. RTA.
Morning, everyone. Leanne Redden for RTA.
Thank you. Will County.
Elaine Bottomley representing County Executive Bertino Tarrant.
Thanks. And Class 1 Railroads.
Lindsay Douglas is here. Good morning.
Great. Thank you. We have a quorum.
All right. Thank you very much, Erin. Moving on here to agenda item number 2, I have been informed that there are no changes to the agenda or the announcements. So with that, we will move into agenda item number 3, and that is the minutes from our January 12th, 2023 Policy Committee meeting. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to move the approval of the minutes from that meeting. If you do make a motion, I ask that you state your name and whether you motion or second.
Jeff Shoki, Chairman of Council of Mayors, making the motion for approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. And a second?
Rocco Zucchero, Illinois Tollway, second.
Thank you, Rocco. Any further discussion? Okay, we will take this one with a roll call vote. Erin, will you please call the roll?
Oh, sounds good. Thank you. IDOT.
Aye.
CDOT.
Yes.
CMAP Beal. CMAP Brawley.
Yes.
CTA.
Yes.
Cook County.
Yes.
Council of Mayors.
Yes.
DuPage County.
Yes.
Illinois State Toll Highway Authority.
Yes.
Kane County.
Yes.
Kendall County. Lake County.
Yes.
McHenry County.
Yes.
Metra.
Yes.
Pace.
Yes.
RTA.
Yes.
Will County.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to our updates and report section. First, we will get the Executive Director's report. Executive Director Alleman.
Great, thanks so much. It's been a busy couple months since we last met in January. I just wanted to provide some updates for you on the ongoing activities here at CMAP. First and foremost, I know that many of you are aware that Our boards and our committees are considered public bodies, and we will be returning to in-person meetings starting May 11th when the governor's disaster declaration is rescinded. So without any changes to the Open Meetings Act here, we will be back to 2019. So as required by the Illinois Open Meetings Act, a quorum of the members will need to be physically present. For this committee, I believe it's 12. That's actually not right. I'll get the number for this. That's my board meeting notes from yesterday. Under the Open Meetings Act, if a quorum of the members of the public body are physically present, then they can request virtual participation if the situation meets the conditions outlined in OMA and our bylaws. So the request would need to be approved by a majority of the board here. In line with our mission and values here, we will continue to allow for public participation virtually, however, and we will be working on the necessary policy and bylaw changes to implement these and be bringing that back to you here, bringing that to our board here at a future meeting so that we can have that flexibility for the public. On the legislative front, in late January, I was able to go to DC with the National Conference of National Association of Regional Councils and meet with several of our members and our federal congressional delegation to update them on our work and bring them the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act prioritization booklet that we collaborated on. Everyone was pretty excited to see that. Again, if you have an opportunity or if you have a need to have copies of that, if you're going to DC, if your executives are going to DC and would like some copies, please reach out to us. We would be happy to make those available. I think, again, it was great to show them that we're already checking off things on that list, including a CDOT project for bridges on the south side, Metro project for the UP North Line, the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. So great resource. And I think they're excited that we have that booklet in their pockets. I know that many of you also have heard that we received news that the $5 million Safe Streets and Roads for All grant for our region was awarded. It will go a long way in helping our region through partnerships with our counties address a sharp rise in traffic fatalities, particularly those among pedestrians and bicyclists. So in partnership with IDOT and 6 counties here in Northeastern Illinois, we jointly submitted this application. It was a new partnership for us where the counties are making that contribution on behalf of the work that will be done in their counties, but we're sort of that regional convener and coordinator role, a great role for us. I also just wanted to say thank you to each of the county representatives here. Thanks to your board chairs as well and your boards for supporting this really important process and project. Thank you too to IDOT for making over $400,000 available as local match as we think about some of the places across our region that need more equitable outcomes and safety countermeasures as well. So thank you again for your continued partnership. As soon as we have that federal sign off on that document, we are getting ready to hit the ground running, and we're already working on RFPs and all sorts of stuff behind the scenes here. Couple other things for you this morning. The call for projects for the STP Shared Fund, the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Improvement Program, the Transportation Alternatives Local Program, the Carbon Reduction Program to be funded in federal fiscal years 2024 through 2028 is open. The deadline for applications is tomorrow. I wanted to give you all a little bit of a sense of the timeline once we receive those applications. Through June, we will be completing project evaluation and scoring, and we'll present those to from staff and those recommended programs to the respective project selection committees. Once the recommended program is presented, then there will be a public comment period. It'll take place about mid-July to mid-August. And then we will review public comments, make any necessary updates to recommendations, and present that final program of projects for consideration in August. Once approved by the committees, the tip changes will then be made for the CMAP Transportation Committee's consideration, and then the final approval will occur when the MPO Policy Committee approves those tip changes at their joint meeting with the board on October 11th, 2023. So I know that's a little bit of a long timeline here, but that's the process. So I think are trending in terms of a normal year in terms of the number of applications that we're receiving, and excited to see what the program shapes up to look like here. Also wanted to make note here that next Wednesday, the Plan of Action for Regional Transit Steering Committee will convene for its second meeting. This project is really moving fast, and our team will provide an update later on the agenda. We hope to have a substantive conversation with you here as we look at some of the funding needs and how we solve that funding gap for our transit system here across the region. I just wanted to make note to many of you too, though, that we are planning to hold a special meeting of the MPO Policy Committee in September to bring forward and discuss the report recommendations prior to the October meeting. So similar to how we run our board, you would see a draft, we would, hear from you, get direct input from you, then followed by that October meeting. So we'll be reaching out with some dates and times to make sure that that happens here. And then on your agenda today for consideration and approval is the fiscal year 2024 proposed Northeastern Illinois Unified Work Program budget, or the UWP budget. The UWP is the most significant portion of CMAP's comprehensive budget, which funds transportation work for the region. The Transportation Committee recommended it for approval at its last meeting. We'll give you a higher level overview. I do believe you received a video that you may have watched in advance that was a little bit more comprehensive on what's included in our overall budget and work plan, including the UWP work plan there. Again, the process for that is that once it's approved here, we submit preliminary documentation to IDOT during this phase. Again, go back and forth with them on some adjustments to our budget until we come to an agreement in May or June. And then the budget items continue to be slightly refined as we move forward in that process. But again, our goal is to get that to IDOT here after this meeting so we can begin that negotiations and then get that contract signed and ready for July 1. And then final thoughts here, I just wanted to take a moment and recognize and congratulate PACE Executive Director Melinda Metzger for 45 years of service. I know that you will join me in thanking Melinda for her many years of service and dedication to improve the region's transit and transportation system here. So congratulations, Melinda. We saw that note. It was just fantastic to be recognized.
Thank you so much, Erin. I appreciate it. And just for the record, I want to tell everyone, I started when I was 5. Just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer questions of the committee.
Any questions for Executive Director Alleman? Okay, Erin, thank you very much for that report. And I think the committee as a whole would extend their congratulations to Melinda as well. What an accomplishment, all of the work that you've done to date. And we know that vision, excitement, and creativity that you have moving into the future. So congratulations, and congratulations to all of us on that report about the award for the Safe Streets and Roads for All. This was one of the largest planning grants that was received. So this is great work that CMAP's going to be doing on behalf of all of us here in the region. And again, really addressing that critical need when it comes to safety for our most vulnerable users. So many of us are very excited to begin this initiative. So congratulations again. Next item on our agenda, 4.02, we are going to hear a report from the CMAP board, calling upon Leanne Redden. Leanne?
Thank you, sis. I will be brief. The board met in January and February, and during that time, the board approved the roadway safety performance targets for 2023 and supported IDOT's 2023 highway safety targets as well. We also approved, or they, because I'm just a non-voting member. They also approved the 2023 federal and state advocacy agenda and the comprehensive budget for fiscal year 2024. The board also received some reports, the Climate Committee summary of the 2022 calendar year work plan and its objectives for 2023. We also got a report on the legislative update and the efforts to secure funding for the full implementation of the Regional Planning Act. Senator Villavelam introduced Senate Bill 1429, and John Carpenter, CMAP's Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, is going to provide an update for this group later in this meeting as well. We also got updates on the PART report. The PART Steering Committee had held its first meeting in January, and they're going to be meeting throughout the 2023 calendar year Laura Wilkinson, the Senior Director of Policy and Policy Advisor for CMAP, will also be providing an update later today. The board didn't meet on March 8 due to a lack of quorum, and they are looking for an alternative date to meet this month. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Any questions for Leanne on the CMAP board report? Okay, thank you very much, Leanne. Moving on to item 4.03, we will now hear from Mayor Shelkey for the Council of Mayors report. Mayor.
Thank you. The January 17th, 2023 Council of Mayors Executive Committee meeting included updates regarding CMAP, the STP Project Selection Committee, Transportation Safety, IDOT's local roads, and a legislative update. The committee was informed that the ADA Transition Planning Team is reaching out to communities and conducting workshops regarding ADA planning all over the region. The committee received presentations regarding the plan for regional transit, a report on the local planning call for projects, and finally, an overview of CMAP's recent municipal survey. Our next meeting is scheduled for April 18th, 2023. In May, all CMAP committee meetings will no longer be virtual only. All committee members will be asked to resume meeting in person. The CMAP staff is working on a hybrid meeting so that the general public and non-committee members can still be part of the meeting. And I might just add, as the chairman of the CMAP Council of Mayors, I've started to receive quite a bit of interest and inquiry from my counterparts throughout the region about the plan for regional transit. And so I would anticipate there's going to be quite a bit of conversation being generated by the Council of Mayors as we go forward on this. And I would probably suggest to our staff that at our next meeting, we probably should have a special part of the meeting that kind of brings that up to where it is at that moment so that the mayors will have a better understanding, because some of the things I'm hearing I don't think are true, and it's wild rumors and everything else. So we want to make sure that we've got the proper information and allowing everybody to have a just understanding of what is happening and what is being proposed. So thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Shelkey. We'll make sure to add that to the upcoming agenda for the Council of Mayors.
Thank you for that report, Mayor. Any questions on the mayor's report today? Okay, hearing none, we will move along. The next items on our agenda, 5.01, we are going to hear from Alex Ensign and Amy Lee on the Unified Work Program budget. You heard Aaron mention it during the executive report earlier. Some of the items are going to be included, and I just want to say it is really helpful. The various videos that CMAP is putting out, I think with all of the activity that's taking place, really helping others get their arms around it and sharing it with staff who are also participatory in these conversations with us has been extremely helpful. So I do just want to recognize the extra effort that has gone into that communication. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Alex and Amy. Aaron.
Sounds good. I'm going to kick us off here with just a couple of grounding pieces of information. I recognize that as I look out there through these little Zoom boxes, there have been some new faces that come to the table. And I want to just, part of our process of developing our budget and work plan, I think it's in our best interest to make sure that you understand it completely, where the funding is coming from. So I'm going to provide sort of a brief overview before I hand it over to Alex and Amy to talk about some of the details here. So again, as I mentioned this morning, that the UWP element of our annual comprehensive budget and work plan is the largest element, and that funds significant transportation, research, modeling, and analysis work for many of your organizations and your planning prior to project implementation. Next slide. So throughout the process of developing our annual work plan and budget, we really kick this process into gear in October to December, which is when we receive our federal mark from IDOT for the next year's budget. Again, but it's a continuous improvement process throughout the year. So we develop these work plan items for the upcoming fiscal years from July through September in anticipation of that mark. But again, we really look at our program of projects in making sure that we're aligning them with our strategic direction, which is our 5-year plan that prioritizes the work that's outlined in On to 2050. So in the last quarter of the year, we developed that work plan further as the UWP grants to partner agencies are finalized in December. The call for projects for the local technical assistance program are announced, vetted, and chosen. And then, we enter the phase of our budget process when we present our proposed budget to the MPO Policy Committee. So we're here today. Again, during this time, and once we're through here, as I mentioned earlier, again, we submit that draft budget to IDOT so that we can make sure that we have an agreement in place by July 1st. So next slide. I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about here at CMAP and our role and the work of transportation, our transportation committee and our transportation implementers here is that there's some, again, as many of you know, many new opportunities for us to be collaborating, for us to be utilizing our transportation funding and leveraging it to accomplish a multitude of goals, especially as we think about the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. But I think two resources for planning and transportation are coming from a wide array of programs and funds, both at the state and federal level. So historically, much of the federal policy and program guidance related to our work as the regional planning agency was encapsulated in the transportation bill. But more recently, we've seen this broad recognition of the important connections transportation has to, economic mobility, household incomes, and climate. And so this dynamic environment really requires us to think beyond traditional solutions, to foster collaboration in really meaningful and holistic ways. So as the new federal legislation has been passed and funding opportunities and policies evolve, we will continue to apply for competitive grants and collaborate with our partners to take that regional approach that is just so needed in a comprehensive, complex region like Chicagoland. We will also continue to look for complementary funding sources to fund our work that touches transportation and the economy and the climate-focused areas. And then our federal legislative agenda with priority projects for funding will guide that work through the next few years here. Next slide, thank you. Before we get in the details of the UWP budget, I want to just take a moment and explain where the money comes from and how it gets distributed to CMAP's comprehensive budget, which includes both UWP funding and other federal funding sources and local funding sources. So much of our funding comes through Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration through to IDOT as one of 16 MPOs in Illinois. Of that funding, we grant about $6.3 million to our partner agencies. That number does include the local match, but this is the local portion of the UWP program. We'll describe it in a little bit more detail later in this presentation. But the other portion of our budget uses those federal dollars on our MPO required functions, which include development and implementation of the 30-year long-range transportation plan on to 2050, the production of the Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP, which is our 5-year agenda of surface transportation projects and the list of all the federally funded projects in the region, and the administration of the annual UWP work program, which we just simply call the UWP. And then we also include the programming of funds like the Surface Transportation Program, CMAC, TAP, our new carbon reduction program this year. So next slide. And then all of this this funding, right, needs a local match. So the Illinois Department of Transportation's contribution does help us meet that 20% required match to unlock federal dollars, which have doubled under IIJA. It also supports the work of CMAP on our valuable planning, technical assistance, data and analysis for partner agencies in our communications and engagement work. This budget does reflect a more sustainable funding sources. One of our key operational goals in our strategic direction is to diversify our funding sources to provide that sustainable revenue sources for our work here. In order to meet our increased local match for federal planning funds, local contributions have increased and now make up $1.6 million in our annual budget. This budget reflects increases from the counties, the RTA and service boards, and local municipalities. We also plan to increase local municipal contributions at manageable increments over the next 5 years to continue to match that obligation and those resources that are available at the federal level here. Again, this revenue helps us mitigate operational risk against potential funding uncertainties, provides funding for the region to access federal funding, provides some of that match for SPR grants for competitive programs, and more importantly, just helps us meet our regional planning requirements and mandates that come through the federal transportation bill here. And finally, this budget also includes work in our economy and climate spaces through funding from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, MacArthur Foundation, Chicago Community Trust, and some work that we're doing with Cook County directly here. So again, that's sort of the comprehensive part of the budget, but we're really focused on the UWP portion of the budget here. Again, just recognizing we'll continue. We've got our eyes out on a number of competitive grant opportunities and philanthropic dollars to build more diverse funding. And again, to look at stuff that can't be funded through the UWP. I'm going to pause here before I have Alex and Amy get into the details of what's in the budget. I just wanted to see if there were any questions on sort of how does the funding flow and how does it get to CMAP first?
Any questions for Aaron? I think you did a really nice job laying this out and breaking it down so we could see that flow of funding and how it's being allocated within CMAP. Any other questions?
If not, thank you. I will go ahead and kick it over to Alex.
Thank you, Aaron. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair Killen. Today, first I'll introduce myself. My name is Alex Ensign. I'm the Director of Strategic Alignment and Innovation here at CMAP, and I'm excited to be here today to tell you about our UWP budget. As Aaron mentioned, we're focusing on the UWP budget, but we did include a link to our comprehensive budget document in the memo you received in your agenda packet. And that document also outlines our other operational and non-UWP funded work in much greater detail, including through that video that we created. This is the UWP portion of the budget, which we do ask to be approved today by the MPO Policy Committee. We're asking for approval of $31,157,952 in total, of which $24.9 million goes to CMAP to fund our core MPO activities. This amount includes an additional $1.5 million from IDOT that was provided to CMAP in January of this year from previously unspent planning funds. $741,000 is set aside to meet the IIJA required Safe and Complete Streets function through CMAP's new Safe Travel for All Roadmap, or STAR program. A significant portion, about 20% of the region's UWP funding, $6.3 million, goes directly to our UWP partners to fund their core MPO activities. Just under $2 million funds the Council of Mayors, including planning liaisons. $1 million goes to CDOT to support regional planning and transportation programming processes, including development of the TIP. This money also funds technical and policy studies and analyses. $864,000 goes to Metra to fund their capital program development, grant administration, and asset management plan. $838,000 goes to CTA to support the regional transportation program and TIP. $442,000 goes to PACE to fund capital program development and asset management and the shared mobility program. $403,000 goes to Will County to fund their 2050 long-range transportation plan. UWP funding goes to the counties in our region on rotation on an annual basis. This budget was approved by the UWP committee in their December 22 meeting and incorporated into our comprehensive budget and work plan. You may have noticed that this budget only includes core funding and does not include a competitive program. We paused the competitive program for fiscal year 24, but plan to reinstate the competitive program for FY 2025, along with an improved core and competitive framework and support for the UWP committee. CMAP is committed to maintaining the competitive program and making it successful. We know this is a priority for our partner agencies. So as we mentioned previously, the UWP budget funds CMAP's core MPO activities conducted on behalf of the region, in addition to those I mentioned for our partner agencies. CMAP's core activities include planning regionally and locally through On to 2050, local technical assistance, and other resources. Collaborating and convening with our government partners, community organizations, other stakeholders, and the public. Prioritizing and programming by evaluating and allocating federal transportation dollars using sophisticated selection criteria, and delivering data through financial and policy analysis, modeling, mapping, and other resources on behalf of the region. CMAP's annual budget and work plan is aligned to our strategic direction, which outlines 3 strategic areas of focus: transportation, climate, and regional economic competitiveness. Much of the work in our FY24 work plan tackles issues and advances priorities in these three areas, as well as at the intersection of these areas. Our transportation work is funded through the UWP budget, and much of our climate and economy work is funded through those other sources we mentioned. Before we go into detail about the transportation focus area, I did want to highlight a few key initiatives in our other focus areas, which of course intersect with transportation because transportation touches everything. Our climate work in FY24 will build on assessments completed in FY23 to help our region address flooding and build more resilient transportation infrastructure. We will also address air and water quality issues with comprehensive plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and manage water quality. At the intersection of these two focus areas, CMAP will oversee a carbon reduction program outlined through the new bipartisan infrastructure law, help put an equitable electric vehicle network in place, and tackle transportation emissions mitigation. Our work in economy centers around partnerships. We will continue to support the new regional Chicagoland Economic Partnership to help our region work as one to attract sustainable industries and build on our strengths as the freight hub of the nation. We will also coordinate regional planning around housing to ensure that the region can offer diverse and accessible housing options for our residents. Our work at the intersection of transportation and economy includes ADA planning, which can provide considerable economic benefits in addition to safety and accessibility benefits to residents frequenting local commercial corridors. These are just a few of the elements of our work plan that advance our On to 2050 goals of inclusive growth, prioritized investment, and resilience. I'll now pass it on to Amy Lee, our Deputy of Transportation, to share a bit more detail about our transportation work funded through this budget in FY24.
Thanks, Alex. Good morning, everyone. In addition to PART and STAR, which you've heard about, I'd like to share a few other highlights from our transportation work that's included in the FY24 budget. As many of you know, much of our operational work in the transportation area centers around research, analysis, and programming. As part of our federal compliance requirements as the region's MPO, one of our core functions is management of the TIP, along with the associated federal conformity analysis. The value of the TIP is really rooted in our collective commitment to get those projects implemented. So we're also collaborating with our regional partners to support new and existing funding being awarded and obligated within the TIP. As Aaron mentioned at the top of the meeting here, we have a call for projects out right now. The deadline is tomorrow, but the call for project supports 4 grant programs: CMAC, TAP, surface transportation, and carbon reduction. In addition to providing support to applicants navigating these 4 grant programs, my team also oversees the evaluation of all the applications to ensure our region's programming really is reflective of our collective focus on emission reduction, safety, and efficiency. And then in the spirit of continuous improvement, as Alex mentioned earlier, this year, my team will also head up improvements to the Unified Work Program that will support a more predictable and comprehensive core and competitive funding process. Building on our previous work to maximize the increased federal funding in FY24, we will provide data and analyses to support grant applications and work with councils of mayors in the planning liaison program to help them understand and benefit from the new federal program. We'll also look to provide analysis on strategies that could accelerate or streamline project implementation. In January, we kickstarted a really great discussion with FHWA, IDOT, and a number of you counties around project bundling and how we can help many agencies here. They're all feeling shorthanded to more efficiently get their projects through procurement if we started to collectively think about developing a program of projects for solicitation. So I'm really excited about that. Lastly, we will continue to provide research and data support for our key priorities around ADA, safety, and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. These are just a few of the highlights in my area for our upcoming fiscal year. With that, I'll turn it back over to Aaron.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Alex. So in summary, our work on behalf of the 7 counties, 284 municipalities, 8.5 million residents in our region is really guided by that long range plan onto 2050, which is our coordinated, our partnership that we developed in partnership as sort of our North Star here. And so we are constantly prioritizing federal transportation dollars through collaboration, through consensus with you all to inform our decision-making here. Again, we research, we forecast, we model data so that we can help assess some of the complexities of our regional issues that cross jurisdictional borders. And then we think about that, how it relates to travel and land use and our policy issues, including looking at work for people with disabilities across our region and how they get around as well through our ADA program, through our safety programs. And again, we are all thinking about greenhouse gas reductions here and the implication of transportation to our air quality as well. So again, just wanted to thank you for your participation here in these big regional issues. I know when you work at the local level or at the county level or at the tollway level, right? You're thinking about your goals and objectives of your agency, and CMAP really does exist to help make sure that we're blurring those lines and we're making the best decisions, the most informed decisions to provide the greatest return on investments for the resources that we have here. So just wanted to say thanks. Again, we are requesting your recommendation or we are requesting your approval of the Unified Work Program for fiscal year 2024 today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that very comprehensive report. I mean, it really provides context to the broad initiatives and programs that are being advanced by CMAP and the opportunities that are being made across this region. So as Executive Director Alleman had just mentioned, there is action before the committee today on this item. So I'll now entertain a motion to approve the fiscal 2024 UWP budget. And just a reminder to please state your name when you motioned or second.
So moved, Biagi.
Thank you,
Melinda
Jan. All right, and Mayor Shelkey second. Thank you very much. Any further discussion?
Yes, Sis, if I can, I'd just
Please.
like to compliment CMAP on their advancement of the ADA initiative across the region here. I think the partnerships that CMAP is developing with the local governments throughout the region will yield better accessibility for citizens all across the region here. And I think it's a wonderful program. I'm glad to see it supported so well by CMAP, and I'm glad to see it included in your programming for this upcoming year. So that ADA program across the region is vital, and it's very important to our people that live here.
Thank you very much. Any additional comments or discussion? Hearing none, Erin, if you could please call the roll.
Sounds good. Thank you. IDOT?
Yes.
CDOT?
Yes.
CMAP Beal? CMAP Brawley?
Yes.
CTA?
Yes.
Cook County?
Yes.
Council of Mayors?
Yes.
DuPage County?
Yes.
Illinois State Toll Highway Authority?
Yes, and great work on this report.
Thank you. Thanks to the team too. Kane County?
Yes.
Kendall County?
Yes.
Lake County?
Yes.
McHenry County?
Yes.
Metra?
Yes.
Pace?
Yes, great work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. RTA
Yes.
and Will County.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great, thank you all. Moving on now to item 6.01, we are going to hear a presentation from Laura Wilkeson, the Senior Director and Policy Advisor on that plan of action for regional transit. We've heard this coming through our committee before. We heard this also coming through many of the updates that were provided at the start of the meeting. And I really hope we can have a very robust discussion on this, given the importance and action that's going to be required by this committee come the end of the year. So with that, Laura, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
And while Laura's getting online here, again, this is a place where I'm asking each of you to sort of think about your local hat and your regional hat sitting on this committee. I think if we could just go to the next slide here. I just want to frame this again, that transit is about people, right? It's about the people across our region, giving them multimodal options to get to where they need to go. But our work that CMAP has done over the past couple of years looks at some of the equity implications and how low income households get around our region and how they rely on our transit system to get them to more places for more things, more daily necessities than people with higher incomes. So as we think about this work and its importance, I really want to make sure that we're thinking about the people who use transit, whether they use it to get to work or whether they use it for more daily activities. It's crucial. It enables mobility for riders and non-riders, right? So why does CMAP care about this? We care about this because as we program transportation dollars towards roads and bridges, we need to be thinking about the congestion that everyone's been complaining about over the past year or so, and recognize that we have an asset in our backyard that we should be thinking about. That transit really fosters this vibrant and connected regional economy. The downtowns across our region that have transportation, transit access, have great little centers. They have businesses. And that's one of the reasons why many people choose to live in many communities across our region. And that's just a huge value that we have. Transit also enables us to mitigate against climate change and adapt to climate change. It's a really great asset. And I think all of those reasons are the reasons why this conversation is so important here. Next slide. So before we get into it, I know we have asked RTA here to talk a little bit about their oh my gosh, transit is the answer. I almost said the wrong thing. Transit is the answer report and ground us in sort of the realities and the work that they've been doing over the past couple of years to set that strategic plan up and really that outlook of where the fiscal cliff is here. And then we will come back to the plan of action for regional transit and talk about the legislative mandate and scope of work that we have here together with you all. And then I do, as Vice Chair Killen mentioned here, I do want to make sure that we're having time and space for a robust discussion on the future. So again, this is where Erin, the regional agency, has to be like, okay, guys, we need to talk about how we're going to fund this or how we think about the future of funding. And it's not going to be an easy conversation. There will be many complexities that each of your agencies and your organizations will feel some tension on. But if we don't do this, I think our economic competitiveness and success as a region is at risk. So with that, let me turn it over to Leanne.
Come off mute, that would be helpful. Appreciate that, Erin. And I just want to thank everyone. And we're just going to spend a couple of minutes before I turn it over to Doug Anderson, who's really going to dive deep into the plan's financial analysis and its recommendations. But I just want to give you a kind of a quick overview of kind of where we're at vis-a-vis the strategic plan. So actually, as Erin already mentioned, we named our 5-year strategic plan Transit is the Answer because we really believe that it's that a strong transit system is the answer to some of the greatest challenges the region's facing. And transit is the answer to our prosperity as a region, to improved equity and access, to opportunity for all our residents, as Erin already noted. And it's undoubtedly also the answer to strengthening our region's ability to combat climate change. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the plan or perhaps even hear the chairman who spoke a couple of weeks ago at City Club to give a kind of an overview of the plan, if you haven't had a chance, I encourage you to maybe go look at that. Both the plan and that presentation by the chairman are available on our website at rtachicago.org. The plan was adopted by our board of directors last month with participation and support really from leadership of all the 3 service boards as well as CMAP. And what it represents is the collective wisdom really of riders, planners and financial experts, transit and climate advocates, and many, many more. And we engaged thousands of people in a combination of either one-on-one meetings, broader stakeholder working groups, and public events in each county. The result is a list of 14 actions and advocacy initiatives that we really believe are going to be critical to achieving the transit system that I think we all know is possible. So if you can just jump to the next slide. This slide shows the 7 advocacy items on the agenda, and these are largely unchanged from what we presented to you at your October meeting. This list represents what we kind of think of as the longer term issues that we will need stakeholders, meaning CMAP and everyone sitting around, I was going to say table, but this virtual space, I guess, everyone on this committee and more to really help us advance. So next slide. And we said then, and I want to underscore for you now, that really nothing else on this list is possible unless we secure increased funding for transit operations, which is why the very first item on that's why it's the very first item on the advocacy agenda. So doing so, we know is going to require a funding structure much less dependent on fares. And this, as a result, will require more public funding. Increasing fares or cutting service will not solve the problem. In fact, most of the research that we've done sort of shows that cuts in service or increases in fares will only reduce ridership and make the financial hole that we're trying to fill even bigger. So we know that rebalancing our funding structure to be less reliant on fares and increasing public funding for transit isn't going to be easy. Erin highlighted that too, so I'm echoing that point. We're currently working to build a coalition of stakeholders around the value that the transit system brings to the region to really help us make this change and our funding changes as well a reality. So next slide. Increased funding really, we know, must come with changes and improvements for riders. And this is why our action list is equally important. Achieving the goals listed here are also not going to be easy, but they will really help address the changing and unmet needs of our region. And these are things that the RTA and the service boards can take the lead on to implement with stakeholder support. So next slide, please. We've already begun taking actions this year on projects to increase funding, to improve rider experience, and support thriving communities. And when I say we, that's not just the RTA, but that is certainly our partners with the service boards. The plan details explicit actions for 2023 in each of these 3 areas, and I encourage you to take a look at them. We are seeking your input and partnership on these ongoing activities, and specifically the ones that are most sort of pertinent to you and your constituencies. The coalition that we're forming will hold quarterly meetings, and we certainly want you and members of your staff to participate in those activities. If you haven't already signed up, I encourage you to go look at our website or reach out to me directly, and we'll make sure we can get you engaged. I'm now going to turn it over to Doug Anderson from our finance team, who was intimately involved with all of our financial analysis that we've done over the past 1.5 years, and have him talk to you about that work as well as the revenue options that the plan sets out. So next slide, please, and I will hand it off to Doug.
Thanks, Leanne, and good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Anderson. I'm manager of budgets and analysis at the RTA. This graphic from Transit is the Answer summarizes the problem we are facing as a region. That is a looming transit funding crisis caused by an historical over-reliance on fare revenue and the expected exhaustion of federal relief funding. The projected operating shortfall is large at $730 million, but with onset not expected until the 2026 budget year, we do have time to act. First, let's examine how we determine the future budget gap, and then we'll talk about potential revenue options. Next slide, please. During the plan process, we convened a 10-year financial plan technical working group, including finance and planning staff from the RTA, the service boards, and CMAP. The group met regularly over several months and produced a technical memo documenting its work. I helped lead this group, and you can see some of the topics we discussed here, including funding models, scenario analysis, funding options, and recovery ratio reform. As you'll see, our primary recommendation is to pursue a multi-pronged solution to future budget deficits. Next slide, please. To understand the gap, let's first take a look at operating expenses, which for public transit service include labor, fuel and power, parts and supplies, insurance, and purchase transportation services. For the 10-year projection, the service boards provided their best estimates of future operating expense growth required to support essentially status quo service levels. They considered the impact of near-term inflation on labor costs, which represent about 60% of total regional operating expenses, as well as on the costs of fuel and materials. The combined CTA, Metra, PACE Suburban Service, ADA Paratransit, and RTA expense projections resulted in an annual operating expense growth rate of 3.9%. This assumed growth is higher than experienced during the previous decade, in which we experienced very low inflation. The projection on the chart represents our best guess at how future regional operating expense levels will grow, reaching $3.9 billion in 2026, the midpoint of the 10-year forecast period. Next slide, please. This slide shows a range of financial scenarios that the working group modeled. From left to right, the line graph starts with 2022 and extends across the 10-year forecast timeframe to 2031. The black horizontal axis near the top of the chart represents a balanced budget with a deficit of 0. In other words, expenses matching revenues. The bold black line is the baseline or middle of the road scenario. As you can see, all scenarios extend below the 0 deficit axis, representing future projected budget shortfalls. Under the baseline scenario shown in black, the region should expect a budget shortfall of around $730 million by 2026. The assumptions underlying that scenario are that sales tax revenues will remain strong, but ridership will remain well below pre-COVID levels, resulting in insufficient revenue to cover operating expenses when federal relief funding runs out. The 2026 regional deficit of over $700 million represents almost 20% of total projected expenses. Next slide, please. This chart isolates the projected 2026 regional operating expenses of $3.9 billion in orange, alongside the expected revenue, resulting in the $730 million gap we are facing. The gray area represents the forecasted operating revenue, which is primarily fare revenue, of $781 million, and that's similar in size to the budget gap itself. This tells us that fare revenue would have to nearly double in order to resolve the budget gap alone. And that means that the transit fares riders would pay would have to double, which would require something like back-to-back years of 40% fare increases. We are in no way suggesting that the service board should do this. Such a large fare increase is clearly unrealistic and counterproductive to the ridership recovery, which the service boards are working so hard to achieve. At a certain price point, transit would become too expensive for people to ride, as higher fares would disproportionately impact the lower income, transit-dependent residents of our region. Regular fare increases may have to resume sometime in the future, but the next few years do not seem like the right time to do that. Next slide, please. Let's take a step back and share that through peer review and the national news, we know that the Chicago region is not the only region facing this problem. Many large peer systems are facing similar budget gaps in coming years, including several that will hit a crisis point sooner than the RTA. And the magnitudes of their gaps relative to the size of their operating budgets are also similar to RTA's, as you can see on the right side of this chart. Because of our efficient spending and strong sales tax receipts, we may actually be in a better position than some other systems. For example, you'll see both Washington, D.C. and New York expect to hit their budget gaps in 2024. Next slide, please. Before turning to revenue, one more point on operating expenses and efficiency. Before COVID changed everything, the RTA system compared very favorably to our peer regions, as shown in this 2019 chart of cost per passenger mile from our performance measurement group. Our transit system ranked in the top 3 using this measure, and also in the top 3 for operating cost per vehicle hour at the service board level. This suggests that the opportunities for reducing expenses via increased efficiencies may be limited, as the system was already operating relatively efficiently. Cost initiatives should be part of the conversation, but if we want to maintain current service levels or potentially expand service, the primary focus should be on funding options. Next slide, please. Historically, transit agencies have two levers to address an operating budget deficit: raise fares or cut service. The plan makes it clear that it is impossible for RTA and the service boards to solve the funding cliff we are facing by raising fares and cutting service alone. Fare increases of the magnitude needed to fill the budget gap, nearly doubling, would drive down ridership and negate additional revenue brought in by the higher fares, also rendering the system unaffordable for many. Throughout this process, we asked people how the region should respond to a potential future budget deficit: by scaling back service or by pursuing additional funding for transit. Survey respondents overwhelmingly indicated the RTA should pursue additional funding to maintain our system and make transit safer, more reliable, and accessible to everyone, rather than cutting service. Next slide, please. Now for some potential funding options. Two of the working groups within the strategic plan development effort were tasked with proposing funding options, either expansion of existing funding or totally new sources. 27 ideas were evaluated using 6 criteria: revenue yield, stability, nexus with transit, equitable impact, and both ease and timeliness of implementation. A scoring process left us with the 11 most realistic funding ideas in the opinion of the group. These are shown on this chart from the strategic plan in order of anticipated revenue yield, rather than any sort of ranked preference. Annual revenue estimates range from $400 million for a quarter-point increase of the existing RTA sales tax, down to $20 million per year for elimination of the state administrative fee for sales tax processing. Most of the revenue ideas are estimated to yield between $100 million and $200 million per year. Given that the projected budget gap is in excess of $700 million per year, a bundle or some combination of these options would be necessary to fully solve the expected gap. There are trade-offs between the funding options. For example, the highest yielding option, an increase to the RTA sales tax, would be simple to implement, but has an unfavorable equitable impact. Options such as congestion pricing are more equitable and would encourage transit usage, but have a longer and more complex implementation timeline. Some of the state funding options, such as an increase in the PTF match or an increase in funding for revenue loss to reduce fare programs, scored better on equity but are lower yielding. It is exactly these trade-offs that must be considered as we have the conversations on potential funding options. Next slide, please. The 10-year financial plan working group also called for continued relief from the current system-generated revenue recovery ratio requirements, 50% for mainline service and 10% for ADA paratransit service. One important thing to keep in mind is that reduction of the recovery ratio requirement will do nothing to solve the budget gap I covered earlier. Rather, it's an important step to adjust our budgeting process to the structural change in revenue that the pandemic brought on or accelerated. The fare revenue recovery ratio should continue to be monitored as a performance measure within the RTA and Service Board performance measurement initiatives. And the existing balanced budget requirement of the RTA Act would remain as the primary constraint on Service Board operating expense growth. On this slide, we can see that the RTA region had the 3rd highest fare revenue recovery ratio among major systems in the pre-COVID environment. An informal review of transit systems nationwide revealed few recovery ratio policies similar to the RTA statutory requirement. The 2 systems with formal state requirements, Maryland and Denver, had their 35% recovery ratio requirements repealed in 2017 and 2021, respectively. And last slide, please. In summary, the RTA has determined through its strategic plan process that a large shortfall will materialize in the regional operating budget as federal COVID relief funding exhausts. While the size of the future budget gap will evolve as the recovery continues, the order of magnitude is not expected to change, and no single new funding source is estimated to be sufficient to re-achieve balance. Therefore, the RTA should pursue a multi-pronged approach or bundle of new funding options. Future service improvements or expansions will require even more trade-offs or funding solutions. But the RTA region is not alone with this challenge. The RTA has heard from the public and from stakeholders during the strategic plan process that scaling back and cutting transit service is not acceptable, and that pursuing additional funds to continue and enhance transit should be the focus. Guided by the strategic plan, steps need to be taken in 2023 to move us toward new funding sources, and we look forward to working with CMAP through the Plan of Action for Regional Transit process. And last slide, that concludes our remarks. Leanne and I will try to address any questions or concerns the committee may have.
Thanks, Doug. So I'm going to step in here now to kind of go into the space of where does CMAP come into all of this. Again, we've been partners through all of this. So thanks, Doug and Leanne, for starting us off. And everybody, don't forget anything Doug just said, because we're going to come back to it. So just bear with me. I want to kind of, again, reground us, and then, why is CMAP doing part? Why are we here? And how does this partnership work as we go forward? And where do you come in as the MPO policy committee? So again, we've shown this slide to you before. I just want to, again, reground us in what the legislation has asked CMAP to do and why we're coming to the table at this time. So thinking about all the things that Doug and Leanne just said to us, we really want to look at the long-term financial viability of the transit system, not only because it's important to transit, but as Aaron said earlier, it's important to the entire mobility system for the region. And so it brings us into this conversation as we've started the mobility recovery work, and then how do we really make sure that our transit system is sustainable moving forward. I think it's also critical that they've asked us to look at different things like racial equity, climate change, economic development. And then as Leanne and Doug were talking about, it's really building off the RTA strategic planning efforts. So we really want to talk a lot about the different revenue sources, as well as the vision that came out of that effort, and transit is the answer. And then they really called us out to make sure that we did talk about the recovery ratio, sales tax formulas, governance structures, fare systems, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been busy at work trying to make sure that we have the right scope and the right partnership as we move forward. So where do you come in? Next slide. The legislation also mandates that the MPO approve these recommendations that we move forward. And so we really want to work in partnership with you, along with all of our other partners, to make sure that we're having these conversations so that we're not handing over a report of recommendations to you in October and asking for your approval, but really that this is a regional response to this issue. I think it's important to note, as we've talked about, we're going to be talking to a lot of different audiences like our board, different committees within CMAP. We also noticed that, again, as we move forward, we are planning to bring this to our board in September as a draft, and then to the joint committee in October. So when thinking about that, we really think that it's going to be appropriate to have a special meeting of this MPO in September so that we can walk through those draft recommendations before bringing it to you in October. So just as an FYI, we're going to be looking to do that later in the year so that we can talk through the recommendations as draft before we even get to the approval process. Next slide. Thinking about your roles and responsibilities, again, as we think about that you will be asked to approve these recommendations later this year. Again, working through our committees, we're also legislatively mandated to have a steering committee that kind of acts as an advisory role to CMAP staff, to Erin, as she brings those information from the steering committee back to Transportation Committee, MPO, and the board. We're also planning to, again, like I said, work with your members of the Transportation Committee almost every month in order to be working through all of the details. We don't feel like it's going to be probably rational to think that we're going to get through every item within these recommendations at the MPO, but we will be providing information, white papers, videos as we move along the year so that you are getting information about all of those things. Next slide. So since we last met, we did have a steering committee meeting. We were able to bring that group together in January. We'll be having another one next week. Again, to share the same information that we're working with you on to get information input about the different ideas and problems that we're trying to solve. It's also, next slide, been really important that we continue to have a lot of coordination with the service boards. We meet with the RTA weekly, we meet with the service board staff. I'm going backwards here, sorry, every 3 weeks. We are meeting with the executives every month. We've done presentations to RTA board, PACE board, expecting to do this with Metra and CTA soon. So I think it's important as we move forward that we're really coordinated in this response. We all know that if there's any possibility for us to have some movement and support from the entire region, we need to be working together. So we've been focused on doing that as well. So I quickly want to hit, before we get into that wonderful conversation about costs and revenues, where we've landed on our report content scope. So next slide. As we discussed before, we're kind of bucketing our conversations and our work in system improvements, how we pay for it, and how we implement it. Again, as we've been asked to look at these different things, we really feel like these are kind of the buckets that are going to help us move. They are all interrelated and they all connect. So it's really, we can't silo them necessarily, but it's a way for us to approach the topics and move forward. So the next slide is the system we want. I just, again, want to make sure that we share this with you. We're focusing this in the areas of better buses, universal system accessibility, which is both around ADA accessibility and things in that space, as well as accessibility of the system itself, technology, et cetera. Operational efficiencies, safety, security, and cleanliness. Next slide. The how to pay for it, which we're going to spend more conversation on today. That move forward, how to pay for it. Next slide, thanks. Awesome. Is to really look at closing the operating budget shortfall. And so again, a lot of the conversation we want to have today is around new or modified public revenues, but we also want to talk about fares, operational savings, again, as Doug mentioned, the fare box recovery ratio. And then ultimately, again, we're not, we don't believe that we're going to be receiving another relief package in the federal funding, but we definitely want to make sure that we're leveraging it and looking for other things where the federal government plays a role. How to implement it, again, is to really look at the allocation and governance. We'll be talking to you more about this later. We've just started in on this work with ENO, Center for Transportation, as a third party to help us look at best practices and different improvements to any of the structures on how we implement the system. So next slide, heading back into the revenue and how to pay for it space. Oh, sorry, I should stop there. If there were any questions on the scope or anything that you want us to be prioritizing as we move forward there. Sorry, didn't mean to skip that. Any questions on that or things that you really want us to make sure that we call out as we look at the scope of the other two sections?
Okay, we saw quite a bit up on the screen as we were going through, the 3 different funding buckets, the areas where they're going to be focused. So I think as everyone's taken a look at this, making sure that there aren't any topics or items that you think are missing, because this is really going to set the framework for how the detailed scenarios and the recommendations are going to be formed. So I think that's really the importance in what was just shared with us. And while I know it was gone through, a little quick today, just want to remind everybody that, this is something that has been brought up at all of the various committees. There has been outreach done by CMAP, to each of the organizations and agencies. So I think this is really the time as we start moving through that calendar, not a, speak now where it's gone, but I think these are really, really important topics, and they're going to take quite a bit of time to dissect and analyze and really develop what that, multi-pronged solution is going to look like. And I think the other, part of the conversation here is that we're looking at items and, CMAP is asking here what we should be prioritizing. It's making sure that we're thinking about the milestones that we want to accomplish, the items we wish to achieve. And we are going to leave the real dirty work to the steering groups as they need to identify those tactical components, for how we're going to get things done, but, focusing on that thematic level.
And I think it does go into the next slide when we think about kind of our approach and the themes as we're looking at the funding, is that we really believe, and you can go to the next slide, that it's, oh, sorry, next slide, the funding themes, that it's really important that we really feel as we're moving this forward that we marry our funding discussions with those system improvements and with those governance reform. As the legislative mandate has called upon us, we really do feel like the package that we need to take to the legislature will have those other components to it. So I think it's important, if there's things in there that you didn't see or want more information on, please let us know, because we feel at the end of the day, it really has to be a package, again, of the system improvements and implementation recommendations. I think a few things we just want to highlight as we start to approach looking at different revenue options and different ways to fund our system, that these are some of the themes that we've been talking about, is that that obviously we need a stable and diversified funding. As Doug said, this isn't going to be one element, it's one solution, it's really going to be a suite of solutions. And we also know, looking backwards, that diversified funding is going to be important to our region, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Accountability is critical. Again, both within performance and spending. That is something that all of the external stakeholders have been talking to us about. I know they've talked to RTA about, is that that's really important that we have accountability within these buckets as well. As Aaron mentioned at the beginning, this is a regional need. So we're looking at it as it's regional need, regional approach. So looking at options that look at that and, keep that theme in there. As we talked about, transportation dollars, solving transportation problems, another kind of element of, we've talked about that through 2040 and 2050. So something we're carrying through as we have conversations here. I talked about this bullet already. And again, it's going to be a suite of solutions. There's really no magical answer to this. So we're really going to have to look at different options. Next slide. I won't spend too much time on this, but we're trying to clarify that, what we're looking at right now is, as Doug again mentioned before, it's kind of this 20% gap, and the federal relief has been able to kind of plug that hole. And we're really looking at how we're going to bring in different funding sources in order to help in that system. I think the other next slide was, we've talked a lot externally, and people say 730, they've heard the number, which is great, they're listening. But again, as Doug noted, when these different scenarios happen and we look at going forward, it's really not just about a one-time whole, nor is it just that number in perpetuity. We really, again, looking at the different elements that Doug mentioned, and he can answer questions about those. It is something that will continue to grow, and we will need to be addressing it in a long-term sustainable way. Next slide. When we think about how we're approaching this, we are starting with the base level of the different funding options that Doug noted before. We want to get your thoughts on these. We want to talk about them. We want to know what we can provide that would help make your decisions going forward, and what sort of different elements and trade-offs we need to be thinking about as we pursue this. And so one option, next slide, that we have started digging into is thinking about the Illinois sales tax. And so this is a space we're working with SB Friedman and our staff to really, and again, RTA staff, to really look at what are the pros and cons, what are the issues when we think about an increase to the Illinois sales tax. And I think it's important, as we start talking about this, that this group kind of understands about what's been happening with the sales tax. It's obviously been a key, looking at those other slides, it's been a key stable source for transit, but it's also not growing. It's really staying mostly flat as we start to look towards the future, whereas things like services have been growing. I did get asked of us that, with the internet sales tax, has that been applied? And we're like, yes, it's in there. It has a wonderful bump when it first happened because it was a new market, but now people, as we've seen, even just during COVID, right? You're not buying two groceries. You might be buying them online, but you're not buying them at the store. So again, it had a bump, but it's not a growth. So when we start thinking of how we're going to be looking at sales tax, I think it's important to also note that it's not growing and that it's something that the services in our area are. So the last slide I want to share about the sales tax is some of these options that we're looking at and want to have more discussions with you about is, can we look at what would happen if we expanded into services and capturing that emerging market? What happens if we just increase the sales tax itself within the RTA service area or in a larger space like the state? What would happen if we reallocated the 0.25% of the existing sales tax that the counties currently get? Or what would happen if we collected RTA sales tax on different goods and services that are currently taxed locally? Again, as we noted, we understand that these are all things that you will have opinions on, and that's why we want to have these conversations, but they really are a menu of options for us to really do our due diligence of what the different ideas could be that would ultimately lead to what this group wants to recommend to the legislature. So again, we've shared a lot of information in a very short period of time. Next slide. What we want to be able to do is answer any questions that you have about what Doug or I shared, and then really get some thoughts and discussion on what you think some of the strengths of some of these funding sources are, what problems you foresee in some of these funding sources, and again, what information can we be providing as we come back to you or between meetings that would really be able to help you and the different organizations that you work for make decisions as we move forward. So I'm going to stop there for some discussion, and then I'll end at the very end with just kind of next steps and the work in progress. But let's stop there and open up for discussion. If there's some thoughts about, again, maybe we start with any questions for Doug or myself.
Okay, so stopping there, and again, Laura, thank you for all of the information that you put out here, and really some items for us to react to. I think that's a really good way to kind of get the group's conversation going. Not what is it that we have, but what are we comfortable with? What are we able to be supportive of? What's palatable? What is causing the most heartburn, or objection that we really want to make sure CMAP's aware of those concerns as they engage with the various steering committee groups. So I may call upon CMAP to help with the hands as they're going up, but I do see Lindsay, your hand has gone up. Please go ahead.
Thanks. I've been thinking about this a little bit, even in the pre-work, and I'm not, in my experience, especially with transportation post-COVID or even during COVID, and I think you guys touched on this, but sort of the recovery, I could see some pushback coming about, how much do we need these services? Are people going to be working from home? Are they not going to be commuting? Those kinds of things, I think, is something that we always, and especially now, need to touch on as we've kind of see this change. And I'm excited about going back to in-person, as we've been talking about earlier today. And I think that, we're going to start to see a lot more of that here coming in the future. So keeping an eye on that. One other thing, as we talk about sales tax, and I think this is something that when you're talking about public transit and public transportation in general, that sales tax source, the folks that need assistance with transportation the most, those sales taxes can harm those populations a little bit more as the funding source. So are you, how does that balance out in the overall? So those are just a couple of things that are top of mind as you guys have been presenting. So appreciate the opportunity to voice that. Thanks, Sis.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. Chair Pirogue, I see your hand has gone up, please.
Thank you. Let me lower the hand as I gain my computer skills here with hand lowering. The question, what kind of data do we have with other states who are helping to fund this with the tax on services? I know that has been discussed previously as a continued source of revenue for Illinois, but what kind of data do you have that shows that this would be impactful, the amount, and would all of that tax then be allocated to transit?
So I think that's an important piece of information that we need to bring to you. I don't know if Doug has anything right now, but I think some of the details of that, like how it would be designated, is still something we want to work out. So I think that's helpful that we need to bring that information to you. So that's exactly the kind of questions we want, so we can make sure that we share that information as we gather it. And unless there's Doug, anything you have. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'll pop in here, Laura, and just say that I don't remember the specifics from the 2050 plan, but I do know that we have looked at our neighboring states, and in comparison, there are probably 10 to a dozen other services that are taxed in states that are our neighbors, whereas we historically have taxed lower number of services overall. I do think, to your point, would it all go to transit? I think that's another space where, you know, part of the negotiation process and making sure that we have a package that works for us, I would imagine that it would go through a general fund increase, but that we would want to sort of say like, well, how does this help other things at the same time as it helps transit? So I think there would be negotiations around that.
And if I could put in my 2 cents on this, we have the Safety Act, which is impacting potentially all counties in Illinois. It's basically an unfunded mandate, and perhaps some of that revenue could possibly be shared. Public safety for both transit as well as for the general population is of great concern and of interest. So that may make it a little bit more palatable. Just a suggestion.
Yep. No, thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair Prog. Okay, I see 2 more hands have gone up. I saw DuPage, so we'll allow Chris Snyder to speak, and then Mayor Schilke will come to you next. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, sis. I guess maybe this is more for RTA, Doug. And I'll start here and then I have other questions. So looking at the projection, the 4% growth, one of the questions I've been asked is we've discussed internally, you know, the 730 in 2026, how did we get there? What's driving that? And so before this meeting, I know there was a link sent to a video. And one of the questions I'd asked at TC, Transportation Committee, was what was the revenue, what was the expenditures looking backwards the last several years? And so that video kind of showed that for several years, 5 years, it was right around 2.5 billion-ish, I'm guessing. And so it kind of looks steady, you know, that the revenues or the expenditures were around 2.5 to 3 billion. And now we're showing a 4% growth, and it's going to almost 5 billion. So something is driving that. So it doesn't have to be here, but I think it'll be helpful to our elected officials as they're making recommendations to increase taxes, that we kind of know what's involved with that increase. And the other thing at TC was that increase is a projection of growth for the service boards. And I gather it's status quo. It's not the system we're imagining. It's not, to my knowledge. And so is that really the gap? Or as we have these discussions on funding and then the other subcommittees come together with their recommendations, I guess that was a concern of mine, because one of the things we're hopeful in DuPage is whatever decisions are made, that we are going to grow the transit accessibility options in our communities as well. And at Transportation Committee, it was my understanding that is just a flat growth of, if we do everything today, this is what it's going to cost 10 years from now. I don't know if that's a question or a comment.
Yeah, I can jump in on a couple of those answers. To answer your last question first, we did assume status quo service levels. So the projections you saw did not include any service expansions, unfortunately. You know, the $730 million gap, yeah, that 4% growth is on the high side, but as we put this together last year, you know, inflation was first and foremost in our minds. And so that's kind of what's behind that. On the expense side, on the revenue side, we've assumed ridership recovering to almost 70% of pre-COVID levels by 2026, and sales tax growing at about 3% per year. So there's all these big levers, all of which are going to have some error in them. So we will refine that number as we move forward in time. You've seen other regions sort of, you know, redefining their estimates as we move forward. So the 730 is our current expectation. It will change, but as I said in the presentation, I don't think the order of magnitude is going to change. Our operating budget for 2023 is 3.6 billion. So we're not that far away from the 3.9 number that we expect in just 2 or 3 years. Hopefully that helps give some context.
Okay, Chris, and you had 2 questions there, so I think that answered the first. Are you still?
Yeah, I guess the other one was I guess I forgot what the second part was, or more the system we envision. You know, I mean, I guess that's I just want to make sure that as we're having these conversations, you know, and we're sharing them, that as we're marching towards September, that those other subcommittees or the system we imagine or how we implement it, governance, you know, are all feeding into the final decision on, you know, on a revenue stream. Because right now, if it's just moving forward with the system as is, we're not attracting new ridership, we're not growing a new ridership pool, we're not responding to the new needs of how people work and commute. And I know in DuPage, and I think I heard, you know, in the region, you know, commute trips are down, but it's the midday trips that are now, you know, growing. And that's where we're seeing congestion now is no longer in the morning peak, it's in the midday peak. And are we going to be responding to those needs and those riders and growing a ridership as opposed to just trying to reattract those users that are now working from home and won't be taking transit?
Yeah, and I can at least address a little bit of that in the way that we're approaching this, kind of going back to the themes, right, is that at the end of the day, the package that we want really does have those system improvements included. So we've got we're starting with a base of the different revenue projections at RTA, but I think we are talking about how do we marry that with the system improvements that come out of this conversation too. And so I do think that's something that we want to make sure that we're garnering information on and then including in the final package. I will say that, as you know, Doug noted, it's not expanding the service in the way of capital improvements, you know, the capital extensions. So we're not necessarily getting into that space, but I do still think there are different improvements that we are wanting to address that would be included in this operating package. So I would think we are going to be talking about those.
Yeah, and thanks for offering that, Laura. I think putting a real fine point on this, you know, there were 2 slides that we saw up for discussion. While we've got the slide up here for, you know, the strengths or weaknesses of various funding sources that are presented. Chris, to that point, this is a very iterative conversation. So as we're identifying which policies, which programs, which initiatives, you know, that we need to focus on, I think some of the revenue opportunities is what I'll call them, might slide, you know, a little further up or down the chart based on what is that outcome or that goal that we're trying to achieve, and then how palatable or tangible is potentially that fund source to it. So I think that's where we can have kind of that combined conversation here about where those priorities might be, and then maybe that reaction here to the different funding sources that have been presented. Okay, so we have several hands that are going up here. I know this was going to be a very, very robust conversation. Mayor Shelkey, why don't we move over to you, then to Kevin, then to Rocco.
Thank you. I just want to throw on the table here a couple of other things that are happening in the region that are, I think are going to be a positive in this whole conversation. And number one is the growth that is taking place in parts of the region. And I would point out here in the Fox Valley where I'm at, the city of Aurora right now is in the process of tearing down much of what was the Fox Valley shopping mall out at Route 59 and 30. And is basically rebuilding where the Sears store was and the Carson store was, among others, a large apartment complex, which will put it about within walking distance of the main metro station on the line out there. I mean, that's one of the busiest lines, I believe, in Metro's operations, is that Aurora Naperville one on Route 59. Well, it's going to have a whole bunch of more new customers here within the next couple of years as Aurora continues this transition. In my town, we've issued building permits or have approved 549 new living units in the city of Batavia. And one of the things that's developed in our community is senior housing. And right now I have 6 very, very intense senior living units in Batavia. And one of them is the Homestead, which has over 800 residents living there. And what we are finding specifically, one of the big things those folks are looking for is public transportation, paced buses, and also the idea that the bus will take them to a train station and they can get on. The other thing that's happening is I was invited by the city of Chicago to come in for this meeting they had a few months back where they were to declare the end of COVID and we were going to try to get the region back into shape. And at that meeting, they announced about Google buying the Thompson Center and potentially was going to generate thousands of jobs there. Then the reason I got invited was they wanted me to talk about Fermilab out here in Batavia, which has just gotten the federal approval to build a second accelerator. It's going to take 2 or 3 years to get it up and running, but that will add about 2,000 new jobs at Fermilab. So right now they've already started asking about, is there ability to get a PACE bus at Aurora or Geneva to start moving people on the metro train out to Fermilab on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot of things happening. And the last thing I'd like to just make an observation about is, if you look at some of the bigger transportation projects that have happened within the city, they have been put into operation largely because of a lot of strong suburban support. In other words, our regional cooperation here is very, very good. And if you look at who made the motion to go ahead and rebuild the Circle interchange in downtown Chicago, it was a couple of suburban people. And if you look at the expansion of O'Hare Airport, specifically the international terminal and whatever, again, there was some suburban mayors that were very active in that whole thing. So, and there was a few that were opposed to it, but there was a lot more that were for it. And so that was put into place. So there is right now, I think, a strong spirit of cooperation that exists between the city and the suburbs in trying to enhance and do a lot of nice things with transportation. So I think that's just one aspect of this whole conversation that we shouldn't forget and probably maybe need to kind of bring in here and show people what's kind of happening in the region as far as new housing and new transportation systems that are being employed and put into practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll move over to Lake County. Kevin Carrier.
Great, thanks, Sis. For a question, and then there's a couple of comments here too. So I don't know if this is for Laura or maybe for Doug, but my understanding is like federal funding has historically been used for the capital side of improvements on the transit system and stuff. But given this is a nationwide problem that we're seeing, in our other metro areas too, is there potential discussions, or is that viable? Is it a potential option to try to seek federal funding for this? And it looked like on the list of 11, there were some options for state funding and expansions there too, but just kind of a question on the federal side, if that's something that has been discussed or is possible.
I'm happy to jump in here on this, Sis, if that's okay. I can say yes, it's actually listed on our advocacy items. It's not a specific revenue source because you're exactly right. It hasn't traditionally been a funding source on the operating side of things. We are, and as Doug noted too, we're not alone in our challenges facing sort of these fiscal shortfalls. And so we are already actively engaging with other big legacy systems, old transit systems around the country to make the pitch on the federal side. But that's, again, as we kind of highlighted, is sort of a bit of a longer play, but it certainly is on the table and something we are actively pursuing.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add a little thought or nuance to that. I agree with Leanne. There's the conversation of should the federal government fund operating, which, as Leanne noted, it's a conversation we have it in our advocacy as well, and it's I think it's worth definitely pursuing. I do think from where we're sitting, and Leanne, you want to jump in as well, is what we don't want to do is just move the current capital dollars to operating in the federal government system, right? That doesn't raise the ships. And so I think that's part of the conversation too, is that because of all the state of good repair needs, what we don't want to do is just move funding from one pocket to another to solve the problem, because then we're just going to end up in capital funding issues still. So just that little nuance, but I do think we're all, continuing the conversations about operating. I don't foresee in a very short term, and again, Liam, if you want to pop in, when we've been talking to our federal partners, that this is something that in a relief package, they would do another relief package necessarily. We don't see a whole lot of support for that right now, though it is in conversation. We're not seeing a whole lot of push because, as you would imagine, which is another thing we're dealing with the state, there's a lot of industries right now that will also be losing their relief funding. And so this is really an issue we're going to be dealing with both state and federal levels, that everybody's going to kind of be coming, not everybody, but there are other people that are coming to that same fiscal cliff after the federal relief runs out.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Leanne, and thanks, Laura. That's helpful. And for Laura, that kind of segues into my next kind of comment here, 2 comments. So on the put my DOT hat on, like the MFT side of things and the 0.25% sales tax side of things, you know, we've just kind of gotten caught up. I mean, with the last capital bill, the state capital bill, and IDOT's got some additional revenues in MFT. So taken away, I mean, there's going to be some tough decisions here and balancing pros and cons of all these fund sources, but anything that would divert funding from MFT side of things, 0.25% sales tax side of things, would, you know, kind of what you just mentioned there, Laura, take away from capital projects on the road side of things. So culverts and state of good repair and bridges and stuff like that too. So just level setting there, just so, you know, we have an understanding is taken away from one to kind of offset the other. And then on the MFT side of things too, one last point is, I know IDOT, we're all probably aware of this, or most people here, but IDOT has a study looking at the kind of the declining nature of MFT with more fuel efficient vehicles and EVs. We talked about this at Transportation Committee a few weeks ago. But just making sure that, you know, if MFT is one of the ones that kind of rises at the top here too, that there is a declining nature of it. So just making sure that that is considered, right? Or if there's a way to make it kind of indexed or, you know, future to whatever we end up moving on to VMTs or something like that. But, you know, the fact that I think IDOT has a pretty staggering number for their projections of, you know, losses in MFT revenue over the next, you know, foreseeable future. And it's a pretty big number there too. So it's already a dwindling fund source. So just want to point that out as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I think that's something that's really important to consider as we're looking at the suite of funding opportunities, that we are looking holistically at this, because transit is a very critical part of the transportation system. We spent some time earlier talking about, you know, pedestrians and bicyclists and ADA accessibility. You know, this is all part of a very delicate ecosystem. And we know that while we are trying to move needles, we also recognize that there's a lot of sensitivities in which way the needle moves in which bucket, and what could be some unintended consequence or impact, you know, to the users and systems that, you know, we're collectively trying to support. So thank you for highlighting that, Kevin. We can move over now to Illinois Tollway, Mr. Zucchero.
You're muted, Rocco.
You're muted, Rocco.
I thought that's the best thing he ever said.
You're always funny, Mr. Snyder. Just never make me laugh. I said good morning. So I really wasn't saying much, Chris. You know, Tollway's always been a supporter of transit in the region and trying to deliver projects. And I think what we've been able historically to figure out how to support transit is on the capital side. Because we have, you know, there's legislation, enabling legislation that established what the tollway is. We've had, you know, our Toll Highway Act, our trust indenture. It really limits how toll funds can be used, which I think I just need to keep calling this out because I have multiple times. It has implications on the, you know, the increased tollway tolls to help fund transit. You know, while maybe in concept it sounds good, and I think Doug, what you showed the ease of implementation would be easy for that, or on the, you know, the easier side. That is not necessarily the case because again, it would require changes in legislation, and even if we do change the legislation, we would still have issues with our trust indenture and our bondholders still prohibiting how those revenues are used. And there's the specific purposes of how the toll revenue can be used into the tollway system. I think another component to consider on for tolling, more than 50% of the tollway revenue right now comes from commercial vehicles. So if somebody's talking about increasing tolls, you got to think about that part of, you know, how equitable is that to increase tolls on commercial vehicles to help support transit. I believe in Pennsylvania, they had kind of a similar discussion, an issue where tolls were being increased to help fund transit in Philadelphia. Also, to keep in mind, the toll operating area spans well beyond CMAP. We're in, you know, we go through 12 counties. So the reach of our agencies is a little bit broader than just, just the 7-county CMAP region. Again, but I want to emphasize that. So those are some of the complications that I see, but emphasize also that we're obviously going to continue to be willing to work with CMAP, with RTA, with IDOT, and evaluating, discussing how tolls can be used, and getting involved in broader discussions about what the role of tolling could be, and the tollway on these projects. Again, our strength and our ability to work around the restrictions that we have been to invest on the capital side to support transit. So again, I have to call that out. And if I can, one thing and adding on with what Chris and Kevin, you said before, that on the the capital and operating funds, not to necessarily mix the two or swap the two. I brought this up at Transportation Committee as well. Has anybody really looked at, if we expediently spend all of the capital funding that is available to us, how does that drive down any of the operating costs due to deferred maintenance? I don't know if that's been fully considered. And that's what I kind of look at as the accountability piece that I was trying to speak to at the Transportation Committee. We've got funding. I think we need to make sure that we're responsible in investing all of those funds as expedient as possible to drive down those some of those pressures that we're maybe seeing. So not to say that we have to have answers now or today, but I think that's another part of the equation that has to be looked at, as how addressing that state of good repair ASAP helps with the divert some of those costs. So thank you.
Hey, Rocco, I can just jump in real quick and just, to your last point, good points on all the other stuff, as always. And I appreciate the sensitivities on the tolling side. I wore that hat for a little while myself. But seriously, on the state of good repair and the maintenance side of things, it's not really going to move the needle in any significant way to really drive down that gap. It does it have some minimal, and I think Doug could probably speak to it more specifically, but it is factored into our thinking. The 3 service boards have been really working to spend both the state and the federal monies on the capital side as quickly as possible, and it's an ongoing effort. But it would be really what fundamentally is the driving cost on the operating side is labor, and so it would just be really a minimal adjustment, even if there was even a larger influx of and a faster spend on the capital side. It's not going to really change anything in the order of magnitude.
Thank you.
If I could ask too, Rocco, because as you're talking about sort of some of the legislative changes that would be necessary to enable, tollway to further support investment in transit, one of the longstanding recommendations of the On-to 2050 plan has really been that we have a series of managed lanes across the region, and that we're looking at the toll revenue collection on new facilities, not the entirety of those facilities, but perhaps managed lanes could help support, again, either operations or capital improvements. To the extent that we could work with the tollway on understanding, what the feasibility might be, or some of the details or the complexities, or even the revenues that might be made available through taking action like that, I think it would be helpful.
Yeah. I think I'm going to read in between the lines of what you're asking for. Do we have resources available that could help look at some of the stuff and do evaluation? Yeah.
What kind of data do you have that could bring to the table, during this process that might help us again have that full suite of options of revenue? Not saying that any of these things are easy to do. Just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about it.
Yes, definitely we could support those types of requests and asks. I think with the current contracts that we have, we use your model, the CMAP model. We built the tolling elements into the CMAP model, and it's the same firm that's been doing this for a long time. We've done the congestion pricing study years back. We've worked with you before. So if there's ways for us to be involved at that level to, again, figure out what that role of tolling could be and advance that discussion and get better numbers and a sense of what could happen, absolutely, I think we could participate in that effort.
Okay, thanks for letting me butt in. I know just in terms of timing here, I think we probably, this is the biggest agenda item and the rest of it's just sort of like, any other business public comment. So I think we could spend another 10 minutes here.
Okay.
I know we've got a few more people with hands up.
Yep, so kind of respecting that, we've got 3 with hands up, and then I'll offer some of my own comments here at the end, but why don't we go ahead and shift over to PACE with Melinda?
Thank you very much. I just had several comments on some of the things that were raised by different people. First of all, Mayor Shelkey and Chris, the issues about the suburban area, the growth is in the suburban area, and we have tried to be more innovative and are continuing to be more innovative to meet those needs. The comment that there's more midday ridership than peak ridership, that's something that we're constantly working on with making, new services like our on-demand and our van pool program accessible to people who may need that just on a ad hoc basis. As well as the fact that, Chris, you asked, what's driving the cost, and Leanne hit it, that our wages are going up tremendously, as well as our ridership's down. So your wages go up and your ridership, the fare box recovery ratio that you were getting is no longer there. So that's another thing that is driving us to look at different ways to operate our service. We have embraced transit network companies. We have 2 that we're utilizing now, and our board will be asked to approve a 3rd one at our upcoming board. So we're looking at different ways to provide service in the suburbs. And I hope that one of the things that this report will be looking at is innovative ways to provide transportation services. And the last comment I have just was for Rocco, that the tollway and all the service boards, RTA, CTA, Metro, we've all worked very hard together, as well as with the county, with Fair Transit. We're working with, and CDOT, we're working with everyone trying to put better products out there. And the tollway has been a good partner for us because as we do more riding on the shoulders or flex lanes, IDOT also on riding on the shoulders, we can get people from the suburban areas to the jobs in the city or vice versa. So that's been a very important partner, and we hope to see that continue.
Thank you for that, Melinda. Next, we'll move over here, McHenry. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I want to just talk for a minute just about the RTA sales tax in particular. I think understanding that $730 million figure is a baseline, and what we'd all like to see for a better system is somewhere closer to $1 billion a year. I think we really need to really focus in on the RTA sales tax increase as a piece of the solution. Just due to the scale and the immediate nature of this problem, the RTA sales tax, I think, is really the only solution that gets us to where we need to get to. And what I would challenge this group is, I know so far the RTA is really focused in on a 1/4 cent increase across the region. I think we need to look at higher increases as well. What could potentially a 1/4 cent increase across the region plus another 1/4% increase in Cook County look like? And could that get us most of the way there? Unlike MFT, Kevin just talked about, RTA is a more sustainable funding source for transit going forward. Kevin also talked about how, the impact the taking away the RTA sales tax from the collar counties could have. I just wanted to point out, McHenry is already spending $2 million of its RTA sales tax on transit operations through our Dollar Ride program. That's funding that if that was taken away, it just adds to the problem. The problem is still there. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. It hasn't been discussed so far, but I think a 1/4 cent increase in the RTA sales tax is the baseline, and we could even look at higher increases in areas of the region better served by transit, hence the benefits of transit. So thank you for allowing me to comment on that.
Yeah, Scott, thank you very much for that. And I think that's what exactly we're trying to get here. What are the opportunities or scenarios that we think the group needs to go a little bit deeper down on? And again, as was mentioned, steering committee meetings are going to be happening next week. And because this is an ongoing conversation, and you may walk away from today's meeting with a few more ideas that you'd like to share, Erin, if I may, probably it's okay to submit that to Laura in writing so that you can take that under advisement for digestion in advance of those next meetings. So conversation not limited here today. We want to make sure that we're creating that forum for communication. Chris, why don't we go ahead and come back to you and then I'm going to chime in.
Thanks, sis. So two things I heard in the conversation I just want to go back to. First, with Rocco's comment, on the capital side, more or less as it relates to the partnerships that should exist. And I think historically, those partnerships, they could be strengthened. I'm thinking of the county highway system and PACE. And if we, when we think about capital investments, we ought to be looking at signal priority and other things to enhance the system, which can be a transportation investment, which can be a DOT investment. So similar to Rocco's comments on the toll, I just want to make sure that that's out there. I know that's capital, but I think that we definitely would support those types of partnerships with PACE as well. The second comment, I also wore a hat with the tollway for 2 years, similar to Leanne and currently obviously Rocco. And so the one thing on the tolling, just want to raise, the toll, remember being up north in Lake County and talking about tolls and why they exist. And the comment was always, you don't have to take them, right? It's a choice. There's typically a parallel route. It's just going to take you a heck of a lot longer to get there. On the current tollway system, there really isn't an alternative to transit. So I guess Aaron, you briefly mentioned managed lanes. So I guess I want to go back to that. When you think about the managed lanes discussions we had several years ago on TC, is there a dialogue about, you make a choice to drive, but there's a transit system right next to you, for example. So are you looking at corridors? Are you looking at maybe new tolls on new corridors versus, corridors 294 tolling people? There isn't a transit option to make that nexus and help that argument, or that option.
Chris, I think those are great points that we can continue to start to think about here. I think what I wanted to have on the table is like, what are all of the things that are palatable to you? And you're right, if we are going to commit to alternative funding, financing, like, yes, we're talking about operations, but again, it's getting us to that system that we want, investment and sort of transitioning and modernizing the service that we have today. So, good points for us to explore.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. And as I was going to offer my final remarks, giving the committee a chance to opine, that was actually one of the areas I was going to go into, just as the roadway agencies, things that we know that we can do on our end that are going to help further the goals of what is that outcome of transit that we want to have, looking at that traffic signal prioritization, also focusing in on those first mile, last mile connections. We heard about PACE partnering. These are opportunities that we can do as well that help build up and get us closer to that goal we want to have. You had asked earlier in the presentation if there were specific, focus areas or policies that we thought should be prioritized. And, the ones that I want to focus in on, I think that's what lends to what funding sources would be best to further explore some of those opportunities. President Preckwinkle continues to remain very focused on fair integration. We see that presented in the RTA advocacy report. We see that reflected in some of the items here with the system we want, with universal system accessibility. So that's to make that experience more seamless for our users and more convenient for riders as well. The other point that I wanted to make was, a continued exploration on income-based fare policy. So we have made some endeavors in this area with our South Cook Fair Transit pilot, but really looking at a more broader regional approach that as we look for, discounts for our income-based, we recognize that can create a larger delta that we're trying to accomplish. We have a bigger delta we want to accomplish here today, but how that can be brought into some of the larger conversations. And again, which areas we feel should be prioritized may have a direct impact into which funding sources would be that direct tie or support of some of those larger regional programmatic initiatives. But this is something I'm really grateful that we are having this conversation today, that we're going to have the opportunity to continue with this conversation, that we have the opportunity to continue to give CMAP some feedback on this. This is exactly what they're looking for. More feedback and communication is certainly better than less, because we may get a little bit too far away. If we're having these conversations 2 months from now, we may not be able to get to where we need to be come September. So ongoing, please keep that wallet or that line of communications open.
Oh, thanks, sis. I actually have one more slide.
Please go ahead, Laura.
Just thinking about kind of next steps and kind of where we are, and I'll hit it in 2 seconds. And I just want to say thank you to you, sis, for having this conversation and managing this conversation, and to all of you for really providing that input. That's exactly what we need in order to give us more information to get back to you to make these decisions. And thank you. Matt Rowley for your your thing in the chat. We've grabbed that as well. I think all of this information is great. And I would just say, as Sis noted, if you want to provide more in writing or you want to talk to us one-on-one, we would welcome any of the conversations because it's so important to be able to bring this information and thoughts as we look through this. And that's the work in progress, right? We're doing more research and analysis. We're going to be putting white papers together. We're going to bring recommendations and options to you. So expect to see that in the coming months. We're going to have topical discussions where we really bring in each one of these points into the TC conversation. So you'll be getting it through your TC members. We're, Eno conducted 20+ interviews. We're going to bring some more case studies forward from them soon too. So you'll be getting that in later conversations. We're doing state legislative outreach. I think we were just seeing there might be a hearing next week as we were talking this morning. These things are popping up. So I think that the important part is also to make sure that our state legislators are brought along and part of this conversation so that when we hand this over in January, we're not starting from scratch then. So there's a lot of conversation about how we need to be talking to the state legislators as well. Having discussion groups, like you said, the steering committee, we're going to be doing focus groups this spring and summer with different geographic representation, labor representation, environmental, so different conversations there to bring those voices into this. And then again, continuing to work with the service boards and doing presentation coordination. So a lot of work is moving forward and I will look forward to talking to all of you more about this and then I'll hand it over.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Laura. We've got just a couple items that we'll move through very quickly as we close our agenda, but we wanted to bring John Carpenter up from CMAP to give us a legislative update. John,
great. Thank you, and good morning. I will give you a brief report on what's going on. But as you know, the legislature is in the midst of its spring session. The General Assembly is working towards a deadline of advancing substantive bills out of committee by tomorrow. There are many bills that will probably not get a hearing by that deadline, however. After this week, the committee focus will shift to appropriations bills and the budget. As we noted earlier, we have secured bipartisan sponsorship for the CMAP appropriations bill. Senator Ram Villabalam and Senator Don DeWitt have sponsored Senate Bill 1429 in the Senate. This bill has been assigned to the Senate Appropriations Committee on Public Safety and Infrastructure. And after next week, we'll have a better idea of when it will be posted for a hearing. Representative Marty Moylan and Representative Dan Ugaste have agreed to sponsor the bill in the House. That bill is currently still in the Legislative Reference Bureau and should be out, start moving by next week when the House starts moving appropriations and budget bills. We're working closely with our communications team to develop a fact sheet and talking points on these bills. And as soon as those materials are finalized, we will be sure to distribute them to you. Other activity in the General Assembly, you may have seen the governor released his fiscal year 24 budget proposal a couple of weeks ago. We're still looking into the details of this proposal, but at a high level, it seems to be focused on early childhood education and higher education. We will provide another update as we spend more time looking at the details of the proposal. But one thing to recognize, as we've just heard, is that with the end of the federal and state COVID emergencies, a variety of expanded social services and healthcare benefits are approaching the same respective cliffs that we are with the transit funding cliff. Excuse me, on the federal side, as mentioned, the IIJA priority booklet was finalized and distributed, and we're working to promote that among our congressional delegation and legislators. As a next step, we are working on a survey to send to participants about their experience developing the priority project list. Later this spring, we'd like to have a working group come back together to discuss changes that we may want to make for next year's booklet. One aspect of this will be looking at how to bring more municipal perspective into the conversation. One last federal update, CMAP staff will be reaching out to our congressional delegation to remind them to coordinate with us on community funding, project funding requests, as transportation projects need to be included in the TIP. Those deadlines are also coming up very soon, so please be in touch with us if you're receiving questions about this. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that update, John. Any questions? Okay, we'll be on the lookout for that fact sheet and talking points, and thank you as always to CMAP for generating that for the group. Next item on our agenda, is there any other business that needs to come before the committee? Okay, not hearing any.
Oh, I
Oh,
see Chris Schneider with his real hand up.
Real, okay, I couldn't see the real hand. Thank you.
I can't find that hand on this button anymore, whatever.
Please, Chris.
Just real quick, Aaron, is CMAP going to send a save the date for the special call in September? Given how important it is, I just want to make sure that we get that before our chairs well in advance because their schedules do fill up. So I was going to text you that, but since my hand went up, I thought I'd just ask.
We certainly will. And I think we just wanted to make sure that we're notifying the committee here officially, and then we will get that on your calendars. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for that. Moving on to item 8 is our public comment. Do we have any members of the public that wish to address the committee today?
We have not received any asks to make public comment in advance.
Okay.
Hey,
And
this-
oh, Rocco, you aren't the
but, hey,
public.
I'm not better. I was trying to raise my hand on the other one, but it was a little slow to the draw. Really quick, if I can, an announcement. Aaron, I want to thank you and your team for all the work that you did on the fine fees, fares, and equity document that you did in 2021. You know, we used that document to adopt some new iPass Assist programs. I wanted to let this group know that we are now that we've confirmed that we're no longer be accepting cash on the Illinois tollway system. We want to work and establish some focus groups, continuing to build off of that, the document and the findings of that document. So we will be reaching out to some of you if anybody's interested. Really what we're trying to do is making sure that we can reduce the cost of transportation for those who could least afford the cost of transportation by making sure we can get an iPass in their hand or figuring out what we can do to make all of our costs a little bit more equitable. So we're going to be kicking off some focus groups. I am sure we'll be having some staff members talking about this at the COG meetings coming up, but if anybody's interested in participating, we really want to get some community outreach and get into the communities that are most affected, which we don't really do that too well right now. So I just wanted to say that. So be on the lookout for that. If anybody is interested in participating in some focus groups, please let me or any tollway staff members know. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Rocco. All right. So moving on here to item 9.0, our next meeting, as was mentioned, as we kicked off.
Hello,
Oh, sorry. Yes.
it's Garland Armstrong calling from Des Moines, Iowa. How you doing?
Good morning, Garland. How are you today?
All right. I just wanted to give Melinda Metzger from me and Heather kudos to her being on there for 45 years, and we wish we was there to give her a thunderous round of applause because Melinda is definitely a rock star from us as we miss Pace and we watch it on YouTube. So just wanted to say kudos to her for 45 years. That's unbelievable from us. And also, I just want to talk to you about that, what you said on there. Give kudos to y'all for the ADA part of getting more funding for people with disabilities, because especially we need more, because there are some in the different communities area don't have enough what they need so they can be part of society. So I want to give kudos to y'all for MPO and CMAP coming up with it and making sure that the ADA will not be forgotten or be out of touch. So I want to give kudos to all of y'all. And what you said about the funding part, since it's going to be a big part, I think y'all should go to different counties in where you are at and have a town hall meeting and tell them this is serious, so y'all could collaborate together from all walks of life. Tell them that transit is definitely the biggest, most comprehensive priority of them all, so that they can be well prepared when 2026 comes. It's going to be like big problems way ahead. So I think y'all should set up the biggest town hall meeting and be extremely well prepared for it, because we have a little situation here in Des Moines with DART, because they want to make sure how to be well prepared for it. So my suggestion is for y'all go to town hall meetings in all of those counties and tell them what is what and work it out together so y'all can be well prepared and have like the liaisons all together, so y'all and the communities can be together in there, so y'all won't be able to have the biggest financial cliffs of them all, and especially funding problems in all the counties. And maybe the state of Illinois will be well prepared for this. So, and maybe the state should help out too, to see what ideas they got in mind to make sure that it won't be a big deficit down the road. And also make sure that when y'all get to this, make sure send me the progress report on it. And one last thing, also, can you keep up about the recycling thing too? Because we have a good recycling program here where you can get coins, where you can get your 5 cents or something like that. I hope they come up with that program so that y'all can be well prepared for it, because you definitely need a program to get more funding and keep up with the data of it, so you won't be able to be in a deficit down the road. So that's my biggest suggestion of them all. So I'll be glad to have any questions or comments from the committees about anything what I say.
Garland, I want to thank you for your continued excitement, for the work that, CMAP is doing. Your congratulations, and for the comments that you're giving to the committee. Engagement is extremely important. Extremely important. Aaron, did you want to comment on that? I couldn't tell if you were coming off your mute. Okay, we're good.
And I just wanted to thank Garland and Heather for their comments. I really appreciate it. And we miss them. We miss them riding our system, that's for sure. And appreciate what they're doing. Thank you.
And we'll be back in the springtime. We hope we can make it back in the springtime to see you, Melinda, so we can get together and talk again.
Terrific.
Great. Thank you, Garland. Any other comments that wish to be offered? Okay, hearing none. Moving on to 9.0 for our next meeting. As was mentioned at the top of the meeting, we were scheduled to meet again on June 8th in person, and it will be done in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. And with that, we have come to conclusion of our meeting. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Melinda Metzger, so moved.
Thank you, Melinda. And a second?
Lynette Civarella, second.
Thank you, Lynette. Aaron, could you please call the roll?
Will do. IDOT.
Yes.
CDOT.
Yes.
CMAP Beal. CMAP Brawley.
Yes.
CTA.
Yes.
Cook County.
Yes.
Council of Mayors. DuPage County.
Yes.
Illinois State Toll Highway Authority.
Yes.
Kane County. Kendall County. Lake County.
Yes.
McHenry County.
Yes.
Metra.
Yes.
Pace.
Yes.
RTA.
Yes.
Will County.
Yes.
And the motion carries. Thank you all so much for your time and input today. We really appreciate it. See you next meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Everyone.